food is poisoned.
25-year-old Ramona Peavy pressed herself against the cool marble wall of Bellissimo, the kind of Manhattan restaurant where one appetizer cost more than her entire paycheck for the week. Her pulse thudded so loud she could barely hear the soft jazz spilling from the speakers. 5 minutes ago, she'd been wiping down a champagne-spotted table, pretending not to envy the glittering lives of the people she served. Now she was hiding near the staff restroom, holding her breath, because the two men inside were speaking Russian, and because she understood every word. Ramona had taught herself Russian over 3 sleepless years using free apps and YouTube tutorials. It started as a way to feel close to her late father, a linguistics professor who'd vanished under mysterious circumstances when she was 17. But tonight, that private skill might get her killed. "The ricotta's laced," one of the men said, his voice cool and casual. "He always orders the lobster ravioli. Always. Stephen Williams is a creature of habit. That makes him weak." "And the antidote?" the younger man asked. "My jacket pocket. We'll eat the same dish, take the pills, and watch him die before dessert. Nikolai wants this clean. No guns, no witnesses. Just a man who ate bad shellfish." They laughed. Cold, cruel, final. Ramona's stomach turned to ice. Stephen Williams. Everybody in New York knew that name. He wasn't just a man, he was a shadow that owned half the city. Construction, unions, nightclubs, politics, every power circle had his fingerprints somewhere in it. "Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I have missed you all, missed all the experiences we've had together. It's been a rough ride, as we're currently battling some technical issues, but trust me, we're getting everything back and running. So stick around. I need your support on YouTube now more than ever. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the story. 25 years old, and this was her life. Wiping up other people's messes in a restaurant where the butter cost more than her shoes. Bellissimo occupied the kind of real estate that made tourists stop and stare through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers descended from vaulted ceilings like frozen waterfalls. The walls were actual marble, cold, white, imported from some Italian quarry that probably had a name Ramona couldn't pronounce. Soft jazz drifted through speakers hidden so well they might as well have been invisible, competing with the gentle clink of silverware against bone china and the low murmur of conversations conducted in the language of money. Ramona had been working here for 8 months, long enough to perfect the smile that said, "I'm happy to serve you," while her mind screamed, "I deserve to be sitting where you are." Long enough to memorize which tables tipped well and which ones treated her like furniture. Long enough to stop flinching when she saw the prices on the menu. Her manager, Marcus, a thin man with the personality of a tax form, caught her eye from across the dining room and tapped his watch. She was falling behind again. Table 12 needed their entrees cleared. Table 7 was waiting on dessert menus. And Table 4, the VIP section, roped off and guarded like a museum exhibit, had just been seated. She didn't recognize the man immediately. Nobody really did, not at first. Stephen Williams didn't look like what people expected from someone who supposedly owned half of Manhattan. No flashy jewelry, no entourage of beautiful women, no loud declarations of wealth. Just a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, graying temples that suggested distinguished rather than old, and eyes the color of a frozen lake in winter. But Ramona knew who he was. Everyone who worked at Bellissimo knew. You didn't survive in this business without learning which customers could ruin your life with a single phone call. Stephen Williams was the kind of man politicians called for favors, the kind of man who appeared in newspaper articles with words like alleged and suspected but never convicted. Construction permits that should have taken years got approved in weeks if his name was attached. Union strikes ended abruptly after he made a visit. 3 nightclubs, 2 hotels, and a private security firm. That was just what the public knew about. What they whispered about in the kitchen was darker. Protection rackets, money laundering, bodies that washed up in the East River with no explanation and no investigation. The kind of power that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew to step aside. He sat alone at table 4, flanked by 2 men who were definitely not there for the lobster ravioli. Bodyguards, built like brick walls stuffed into expensive suits, scanning the room with the mechanical precision of security cameras. One of them nodded at Ramona as she passed, and she felt her spine straighten involuntarily, like her body understood the hierarchy before her brain did. She delivered table 12's cleared plates to the kitchen and was heading back out when she heard it. Russian. Low voices, male, coming from the narrow hallway that led to the restrooms. The sound stopped her mid-step, made something deep in her chest tighten like a fist closing around her lungs. She hadn't heard Russian spoken aloud in years, not since her father disappeared. Ramona pressed herself against the cool marble wall, just out of sight from the hallway entrance. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain everyone in the restaurant could hear it. She shouldn't eavesdrop. She should walk away, deliver those dessert menus, mind her business like she'd been doing her whole life. But her father's voice echoed in her memory. "You have a gift, Ramona. Language is power. Never forget that." Professor David Peavy had been obsessed with languages. He spoke 7 fluently, taught linguistics at Columbia, and filled their tiny apartment with books in alphabets Ramona couldn't read. Russian had been his favorite, the language of his childhood, inherited from his own immigrant mother. He'd whispered Russian lullabies to Ramona when she couldn't sleep, taught her how the Cyrillic letters danced across the page, made her practice pronunciation until she could roll her R's like a native speaker. Then, when she was 17, he vanished. No body, no note, no explanation. Just an empty apartment and a mother whose grief turned inward like a collapsing star. The police called it a missing person case and then quietly stopped looking. Her mother called it a tragedy and refused to speak his name. But Ramona called it unfinished business. For 3 years after he disappeared, she taught herself Russian properly. Not just the bedtime stories and nursery rhymes, but real fluency. She used free apps that made her repeat phrases until her tongue ached. She watched YouTube videos of Russian movies with no subtitles, forcing herself to follow along. She joined online language exchange forums at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep, typing messages to strangers in Moscow and St. Petersburg who corrected her grammar and taught her slang. It started as a way to feel close to him, to keep a part of him alive when everything else had been taken away. But somewhere along the way, it became hers. A secret skill, a hidden weapon, a door into a world most people didn't even know existed. And now, in this overpriced restaurant where she served people who would never see her as anything more than the help, that door had just cracked open. The voices continued. 2 men, speaking quietly, but not quietly enough. "The ricotta's laced," one of them said, casual as discussing the weather. His accent was Moscow, probably educated, definitely used to being obeyed. He always orders the lobster ravioli. Always. Stephen Williams is a creature of habit. That makes him weak. Ramona's breath caught in her throat. And the antidote? The second voice was younger, nervous, the kind of nervous that came from being new to this kind of work. "My jacket pocket," the first man replied. "We'll eat the same dish, take the pills, and watch him die before dessert. Nikolai wants this clean. No guns, no witnesses, just a man who ate bad shellfish. The media will write it off as food poisoning. The restaurant will get sued, maybe shut down, but we'll be in Brighton Beach before anyone thinks to ask questions. They laughed. Not the warm laughter of friends sharing a joke, but something colder. The kind of laughter that came from men who'd done this before and would do it again. Ramona's entire body went numb. Her hands, still gripping the empty dessert menu folders, started to shake so badly she nearly dropped them. Stephen Williams. They were going to kill Stephen Williams. Right here, right now, in the restaurant where she worked. With poison hidden in his food, while she served it to him with a smile and a "Have a wonderful evening, sir." The men's room creaked open. Ramona bolted down the hallway, her sensible work flats barely making a sound against the polished floor. She ducked into the staff break room, a cramped space that smelled like reheated coffee and desperation, and pressed her back against the wall. Her mind raced through her options like shuffling cards, each one worse than the last. Tell Marcus? He'd think she was crazy. A waitress who claims she overheard a murder plot in Russian? He'd either laugh at her or fire her for causing a scene. Probably both. Call the police? And say what? That she heard two men speaking a foreign language and jumped to conclusions? By the time anyone took her seriously, Stephen Williams would be face down in his pasta, and she'd be the prime suspect. Do nothing? Let it happen? Watch a man die because she was too scared to get involved? Her father's face swam up from her memory, the way he'd looked the last time she saw him. Tired, worried, but trying to hide it behind a smile. He'd been teaching a night class and came home late. She'd been studying for her SATs, complaining about how hard the vocabulary section was. "You have fire in you, Ramona," he'd said, pulling her into a hug that smelled like old books and coffee. "Don't let the world make you small. Don't let fear turn you into someone who watches from the sidelines. Promise me." She'd promised. And then he was gone. Ramona pushed off from the wall. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, someone braver, someone who knew what they were doing. She smoothed down her black work dress, tucked a loose curl back into her ponytail, and stepped out into the dining room. Table 4, Stephen Williams, 2 bodyguards, and somewhere in this restaurant, 2 assassins dressed like normal diners, waiting for the perfect moment to commit murder. The waiter assigned to table 4, a kid named Jeremy who was probably still in college, was carrying 3 plates of lobster ravioli on a tray balanced perfectly on one hand. The pasta gleamed under the chandelier light, the ricotta filling visible through the translucent pockets of dough, garnished with fresh basil and a drizzle of truffle oil.
One of those plates was a death sentence. Ramona's feet carried her forward before her brain could catch up and stop her. She pushed past another server, ignored Marcus's sharp whisper of, "Ramona, what are you?" and reached table 4 just as Jeremy was lowering the tray. "Don't eat it!" The words came out louder than she intended, sharp enough to cut through the soft jazz and polite conversation. The entire restaurant seemed to pause mid-breath. Crystal glasses froze halfway to lips. Forks hovered over plates. Heads turned. Stephen Williams looked up at her with those ice-blue eyes, and for a second Ramona forgot how to breathe. "Excuse me?" he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, but there was something underneath it. Curiosity, maybe, or amusement, like he'd seen everything the world had to offer and was perpetually waiting to be surprised. It's poisoned," Ramona stammered. The words tumbled out too fast, tripping over each other. "The ricotta, 2 men, they were speaking Russian in the hallway. They said they laced it with something. They said you always order the lobster ravioli. They said you'd be dead before dessert." The bodyguards moved. One of them stepped in front of Stephen, hand disappearing inside his jacket, where Ramona knew a gun was hiding. The other reached for her arm, fingers like steel bands. But Stephen raised a single finger, just one, didn't even lift his hand off the table. Both bodyguards froze instantly, like someone had pressed pause on them. "Go on," Stephen said softly, leaning back in his chair. He studied her the way someone might study an unexpected chess move. "You understand Russian?" Ramona nodded, not trusting her voice. "And these men, where are they now?" She pointed across the dining room with a shaking hand. Table 9, tucked into the corner near the kitchen entrance. 2 men in dark suits, one older with gray at the temples, one younger and sweating despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. Both of them were staring at table 4, with expressions that had shifted from confident to pale panic. The older one's hand was moving toward his jacket, slowly, carefully, like he was reaching for something that could fix this situation. Stephen's expression didn't change. He didn't raise his voice or make any sudden movements. He simply looked at his bodyguards and said, "Gentlemen." What happened next was chaos choreographed like a ballet. The bodyguards moved as one unit. Chairs crashed backward. A woman screamed. The younger Russian lurched to his feet, fumbling inside his coat, but he was too slow. One of Stephen's men hit him with the kind of precision that came from years of practice, an armbar that sent him face first into the table, porcelain shattering, wine spilling like blood across the white tablecloth. The older Russian got his hand on a gun, actually managed to clear leather, but the second bodyguard was already there. A single strike to the wrist sent the weapon clattering across the marble floor. Another to the solar plexus doubled him over, gasping. The entire restaurant had erupted into screaming pandemonium. Guests stampeded toward the exits, designer heels and Italian loafers slipping on the polished floor. Marcus stood frozen near the host stand, mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. Through it all, Stephen Williams sat perfectly still at table 4, watching the scene unfold with the detached interest of someone watching a mildly entertaining play. He hadn't flinched when the gun came out, hadn't moved when the chair started crashing. He just sat there, one hand resting on the table next to his poisoned dinner, and studied Ramona like she was the most fascinating thing in the room. When it was over, both Russians face down on the floor with their hands zip-tied behind their backs, someone already calling what Ramona suspected was definitely not 911. Stephen finally stood. He was taller than she'd realized. Not exceptionally tall, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made him seem like he took up more space than he actually did. He walked over to where the older Russian lay groaning against the marble, crouched down beside him, getting his expensive suit pants dirty without seeming to care. "Nikolai says hello, I assume," Stephen said in perfect, unaccented Russian. The man on the floor said nothing, but his eyes widened just enough to confirm it. Stephen nodded, like this explains something. Then he stood, brushed off his knees, and turned back to Ramona. When he spoke again, it was in English. "You just saved my life," he said. His tone was conversational, almost friendly, and probably ruined your own. Ramona's knees chose that moment to remember they were made of jelly. She grabbed the back of a nearby chair to keep from falling. "What?" she whispered. Stephen glanced at the 2 Russians being hauled to their feet by his bodyguards, then back at her. Nikolai Vulov doesn't forgive loose ends. And congratulations, Miss Peavy, Ramona Peavy. Congratulations, Miss Peavy. You just became a very interesting loose end. The room tilted. The crystal chandeliers blurred into starbursts. Somewhere far away, Ramona heard sirens. Real police this time, not whatever private security force Stephen had called. She'd come to work tonight thinking the hardest part of her evening would be dealing with rude customers and sore feet. Now she was standing in the wreckage of a failed assassination attempt, watching the most dangerous man in Manhattan look at her like she was a problem he needed to solve. I just, she started, but her voice cracked. I just didn't want anyone to die. Stephen studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. It wasn't warm, exactly, but it wasn't cruel either. It was the smile of someone who just discovered something unexpected and wasn't quite sure what to do about it yet. "Well," he said quietly, "that makes one of us." He gestured to one of his bodyguards. "Get her out of here before the police start asking questions she shouldn't have to answer. Take her home, make sure she gets there safely." "Sir, that's not—" Ramona tried to protest, but Stephen was already walking toward the exit, stepping over broken plates and spilled wine like he did this every day. Maybe he did. The bodyguard, the one who'd nearly broken her arm a minute ago, touched her elbow with surprising gentleman. "Ma'am," he said, "we need to go. Now." Ramona let herself be led toward the back entrance, past the kitchen where the entire staff stood frozen in shock, past Marcus, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. Her mind was still trying to catch up with what had just happened, replaying the last 10 minutes in fractured images that didn't quite make sense. The poison was already in the food. But so, apparently, was she. And as the black SUV pulled up to the service entrance, and the bodyguard opened the door for her like she was someone important, rather than a waitress who'd just stumbled into something far bigger than herself, Ramona realized her father had been right. She did have fire in her. The question was whether it would keep her warm or burn her alive. The black SUV smelled like leather and something else. Gun oil, maybe? Or just the particular scent of violence held carefully in check. Ramona sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap to stop them from shaking, while the bodyguard drove through Manhattan traffic with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. She should call her mother, tell her she'd be late. Except, how did you explain this? "Hi, Mom, I just stopped a murder at work, and now a crime lord's employee is driving me home in a car that probably costs more than our apartment?" "You did good back there," the bodyguard said, breaking the silence. His voice didn't match his appearance. It was softer than she expected, almost kind. Not many people would have spoken up. "I didn't really think about it," Ramona admitted. "I just reacted." That's usually when people show who they really are. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Name's Marcus. Not the restaurant Marcus. Different spelling. Better benefits." Despite everything, Ramona almost laughed. "Ramona." "I know. Boss told me." Marcus navigated around a taxi with practiced ease. "Where am I taking you?" She gave him her address in Astoria, a walk-up in a neighborhood where the rent was almost affordable if you didn't mind the sound of the elevated train and your neighbor's arguments bleeding through paper-thin walls. It felt strange saying it out loud in this car, like admitting she lived in a different universe than the one Stephen Williams inhabited. "You speak Russian," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "My father taught me. Before he—" She trailed off. Even now, 8 years later, she couldn't finish that sentence. "Before he disappeared" sounded too passive. "Before he left" felt like a betrayal. "Before they took him" implied knowledge she didn't have. Marcus nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Men like Stephen Williams probably left a lot of broken families in their wake. They drove in silence for a while, passing through the evening glow of Manhattan. Streetlights coming on, restaurants filling up, people living their normal lives with no idea what had almost happened at Bellissimo tonight. Ramona pressed her forehead against the cool window and watched the city blur past. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "You can ask." "Stephen Williams, is he— the things they say about him, are they true?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "The boss is a businessman. Sometimes that business gets complicated." "That's not an answer." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's not." He pulled up outside her building, a brick structure that had been painted beige sometime in the 70s and never updated. The entrance light was broken again. Mrs. Chen's cat was sitting in the window of the first-floor apartment, judging passers-by with typical feline disdain. "Listen," Marcus said, turning in his seat to look at her directly. "You did something brave tonight, but brave doesn't always mean safe. The men who tried to kill Mr. Williams, they work for people who don't forget. You understand what I'm saying?" Ramona's stomach dropped. "You're saying I'm in danger?" "I'm saying you should be careful. Lock your doors. Pay attention to who's around you. And if you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you call this number." He handed her a card with nothing on it except a phone number. No name, no company.
She took it with numb fingers. For how long? Until we tell you it's safe. Marcus's expression softened slightly. Look, the boss doesn't forget debts. You saved his life. That means something. He'll make sure you're protected. I don't want protection from him, Ramona said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew how naive they sounded. I just want to go back to my normal life. Yeah, Marcus said gently. About that. He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew her normal life had ended the moment she'd opened her mouth at table 4. Ramona climbed out of the SUV, legs unsteady, and watched it pull away into traffic. The street looked exactly the same as when she'd left it this morning. Same bodega on the corner, same broken sidewalk crack she always stepped over, same smell of somebody cooking curry that made her stomach remind her she'd missed dinner. But everything was different now. She climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her mother would still be up, watching her Korean dramas with the subtitles on, probably worrying about why Ramona was late. What was she supposed to say? The truth felt impossible. A lie felt worse. Ramona unlocked her door, stepped inside, and froze. Her mother sat on their worn couch, hands folded in her lap, face carefully blank. And sitting across from her in their only armchair, looking completely at ease in their tiny living room with its water-stained ceiling and discount furniture, was Stephen Williams. He'd removed his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. On their coffee table, the one Ramona had bought at a garage sale for $15, sat a bottle of wine that probably cost more than their monthly rent. "Miss Peavy," he said, standing when she entered. "I hope you don't mind. Your mother was kind enough to let me wait." Ramona looked at her mother, whose expression said she very much minded but hadn't been given much choice in the matter. "Mr. Williams was just explaining how you helped him tonight, something about a problem at the restaurant." "There was a situation," Stephen said smoothly. "Your daughter showed remarkable courage. I wanted to thank her personally and make sure she understood that any complications arising from tonight will be handled." "Complications?" Ramona repeated. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "You mean the people who want to kill you now want to kill me?" Her mother made a small sound of distress. Stephen's expression didn't change. "I mean that I take care of people who take care of me. And right now, Miss Peavy, whether you like it or not, you're under my protection." He picked up his jacket, shrugged it on with fluid grace. "I'll have men watching your building. You won't see them, but they'll be there. If anything happens, anything at all, they'll handle it." "I didn't ask for this," Ramona said. "No," Stephen agreed. "You asked to save a stranger's life. This is what that looks like." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your father, David Peavy, Columbia professor, disappeared in 2017. Ramona's blood turned to ice. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know things." Stephen's voice was matter-of-fact, neither cruel nor kind. "Especially about people who've just become important to me. We'll talk soon, Miss Peavy. Sleep well." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Ramona stood frozen in the middle of her living room, heart hammering, while her mother stared at her with an expression that was part fear, part confusion, and part something that looked dangerously like recognition. "Ramona," her mother whispered, "what have you done?" But Ramona was thinking about Stephen's last words, the casual way he'd mentioned her father like it was just another data point in a file. What if it wasn't? What if Stephen Williams knew something about her father's disappearance that she didn't? Outside, the elevated train rattled past, and somewhere in the darkness, invisible guardians took up positions around a building where a waitress lived. A waitress who just learned that saving one life might cost her everything.
Ramona didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling crack that looked like a river on a map, listening to the sounds of the city that usually lulled her to sleep. Sirens, distant arguments, the train. But tonight, every sound felt like a threat. Her mother had retreated to her bedroom without another word, but Ramona had heard her crying through the thin walls, soft, careful sobs that tried not to be heard, the kind of crying that came from reopening old wounds.
At 3 a.m., Ramona gave up on sleep and reached for her laptop. The screen's glow felt harsh in the darkness. She opened her email, scrolling past spam and shift schedules from the restaurant until she found what she was looking for. The folder labeled Papa. 15 emails over 8 years, one for each birthday since he'd vanished. They arrived exactly at midnight, sent from anonymous accounts that changed every time. The police had traced them once, years ago, routed through servers in 6 different countries, impossible to track. After a while, they'd stopped trying. Her mother didn't know about the emails. Ramona had never told her. Some wounds were too deep to keep reopening. She clicked on the most recent one, received 3 months ago on her 25th birthday. My little star. The firebird knows the way home, but only when the winter breaks. Trust the language. The key is hidden where the heart remembers. When the time comes, you'll know. Always, Papa. Ramona had read it 100 times, trying to decode meaning from poetry. Her father had loved riddles, loved making her think, but this felt different, urgent, like he'd been trying to tell her something specific but couldn't risk being clear. Trust the language. She thought it meant Russian, but what if? A sound outside her window made her freeze. Not the usual city noise, something closer, deliberate. Ramona crept to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see the street below. The black SUV sat 3 cars down, engine off, windows tinted. As she watched, another one pulled up across the street. Stephen's protection, or his prison. She couldn't decide which. Morning came gray and cold. Ramona got ready for her shift on autopilot. Black dress, sensible shoes, hair pulled back. Her reflection looked the same as always, but she felt like a stranger was staring back at her. Her mother was already up, sitting at their small kitchen table with cold coffee. She looked like she'd slept even less than Ramona. "I called in sick for you," her mother said quietly. "You're not going to work today." "Mama?" "Don't." Her mother's voice cracked. "Just don't. I knew this would happen. I knew the moment you started learning that language, it would lead you back to him, back to them." "What are you talking about?" Her mother looked up, and Ramona saw something in her eyes she'd never seen before. Not just grief, fear. "Your father didn't disappear, baby. He ran, or tried to. And now you've caught the attention of exactly the kind of men he was running from." Before Ramona could respond, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Look outside. M." She went to the window. The black SUV was still there, but now Marcus stood beside it, looking up at her building. He made a simple gesture. "Come down." "I have to go," Ramona said. "No, you don't." Her mother stood, grabbing her arm. "Men like Stephen Williams, they don't save you for free. Whatever debt you think you've paid, baby, you haven't, not even close." "I saved his life, Mama." "And now he owns yours." The words hung between them like smoke. Ramona pulled her arm free gently. "I'll be back soon." "Will you?" Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. Ramona didn't have an answer. Downstairs, Marcus opened the SUV door with his usual efficiency. "Morning. We need to move you." "Move me where?" "Somewhere safer." He held up a hand before she could protest. "It's not a request. Nikolai's people identified you. We intercepted chatter an hour ago. You've got maybe 6 hours before they make a move." The street suddenly felt too exposed, too many windows, too many places for someone to hide. "My mother." "Already handled. There's another team bringing her now." Marcus's expression was grim. "Miss Peavy, I need you to understand something. This isn't about keeping you comfortable. This is about keeping you alive."
Ramona climbed into the SUV. As they pulled away from her building, away from the only home she'd known since her father disappeared, she watched the familiar streets blur past and felt the last pieces of her normal life crumble away. The safe house was in Tribeca, tucked between buildings that probably had their own zip codes. The apartment was beautiful, exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. It felt nothing like home. Her mother arrived 20 minutes later, shepherded by two men who looked like Marcus's twins. She was carrying a hastily packed bag and an expression of pure fury. "This is kidnapping," she said flatly. "This is protection, ma'am," one of the men replied. After they left, her mother stood in the middle of the pristine living room and started laughing. Not happy laughter, the kind that bordered on hysteria. "History repeating itself," she said. "Do you know where your father and I met? In a safe house. Different city, same situation. I thought I was so smart, getting involved with a man who spoke 5 languages and taught at a university." She looked at Ramona with haunted eyes. "I didn't know what he was running from until it was too late." "What was he running from?" Her mother opened her mouth to answer, then froze. She was staring at something over Ramona's shoulder. Ramona turned. On the kitchen counter, next to a bottle of expensive wine and a note that said, "Courtesy of SW," sat a small envelope. Her name was written on it, in handwriting she hadn't seen in 8 years. Her father's handwriting.
Ramona's hands shook as she picked up the envelope. The paper was expensive, heavy, the kind that whispered important before you even opened it. Her name, Ramona, was written in the precise, elegant script her father used to leave on notes stuck to the refrigerator. "Don't forget your lunch. Study hard. I love you." "Don't open it," her mother said sharply. But Ramona was already sliding her finger under the seal. Inside was a single photograph and a note card. The photo showed a young man she barely recognized as her father, maybe 30, standing in what looked like Brighton Beach. Next to him was a boy, teenage, thin, beaten bloody. The boy's arm was slung over her father's shoulder like he couldn't stand on his own. The note was brief. "Ramona, if you're reading this, you've met Stephen. The debt comes full circle. Trust him. He understands what it means to be saved. The Firebird's path runs through the Winter Palace. Find the key. Papa." "What does that mean?" Ramona whispered. "The Firebird? The Winter Palace?" Her mother snatched the photo from her hands, stared at it, and her face went white. "No, no, no." She looked at Ramona with something close to terror. "That boy? The one your father is holding? That's Stephen Williams?" Ramona looked again. The features were younger, softer, but the eyes, those ice blue eyes that seemed to calculate the cost of everything, they were the same. "Your father saved him," her mother said hollowly. "He never told me who, just that he'd pulled someone out of a bad situation and it had made things worse with the family. I thought he meant our family. I didn't realize." She sat down hard on the leather couch. "He saved the life of a future crime lord." Before Ramona could respond, the apartment door opened. Stephen Williams walked in like he owned the place. Because, Ramona realized, he probably did. "I see you found my gift," he said, gesturing to the envelope. "Your gift?" Ramona's voice was sharper than she intended. "That's my father's handwriting." "Yes, he left it with me 12 years ago. Said if anything happened to him, and if you ever crossed my path, I should give it to you." Stephen moved to the windows, looking out at the Manhattan skyline like it was a chessboard he was studying. "Your father was a careful man. He planned for contingencies." "You knew him." Ramona held up the photograph. "This is you. He saved you." "He did." "From what?" Stephen turned, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression held something other than calculated control. Memory, maybe even pain. "From dying in an alley in Brighton Beach because I was stupid enough to think I could negotiate with the Vulav Bratva."
The name hit Ramona like a physical blow. Vulov, the men at the restaurant? Nikolai Vulov. Your uncle, Stephen said quietly. The room tilted. Ramona grabbed the back of a chair. What? Her mother made a sound like she'd been punched. Stephen's voice remained steady, clinical, like he was reciting facts from a file. Your father's birth name was Andrei Vulov. He was Nikolai's younger brother, born into one of the oldest Russian crime families in Brooklyn. Brilliant linguist, fluent in 9 languages by the time he was 20, destined to be the family's liaison with international operations. He paused. Then he fell in love with an African-American graduate student, married her against the family's wishes, and tried to leave. Ramona looked at her mother, who was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. You knew, Ramona said. You knew all this time and you never told me? He wanted to protect you, her mother choked out. He changed his name, changed everything about his past. Became David Peavy, respectable professor, American citizen. We thought if we stayed quiet, stayed small, they'd forget about us, let us go. They never let anyone go. The Bratva doesn't forget, and they don't forgive, especially not betrayal by blood. Ramona's mind was racing, trying to fit together pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. The late-night phone calls her father used to take in Russian, the way he'd tense whenever someone knocked on the door unexpectedly, how he'd taught her Russian almost obsessively, like it was important she understand something he couldn't say out loud. Trust the language. Why did he save you? She asked Stephen. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong assumptions. Stephen's voice carried the weight of old regrets. I was 23, cocky, thought I could broker a deal between the Vulov Bratva and some Irish suppliers I was working with. Turned out the Irish had burned the Russians on a previous deal. The Vulovs decided to send a message by beating me to death in an alley. He touched his ribs absently, like feeling an old wound. Your father found me, bleeding out next to a dumpster, broken ribs, collapsed lung. He could have walked past, should have walked past, helping me put a target on his back. But he didn't. He dragged me to his car, kept me alive for 3 days in some basement apartment, used his medical training to patch me up enough that I could get to a real hospital. Why? Ramona asked. Why would he risk everything for a stranger? I asked him the same question. Stephen smiled faintly. He said, because violence is a language too, and I'm tired of speaking it. Someone has to choose differently. He told me he had a daughter who was going to change everything, that he wanted her to grow up in a world where saving people mattered more than killing them. Ramona felt tears burning her eyes. That sounded exactly like something her father would say.
3 weeks after he saved me, Stephen continued, his voice hardening, Nikolai's men came for him. They didn't kill him, not right away. That would have been too merciful. They took him, made him disappear, sent a message to anyone else in the organization who might have similar ideas about leaving. But the emails, Ramona said, he's been sending me emails every birthday. He's alive. Alive, Stephen agreed. But where and under what conditions, I don't know. The Bratva has facilities all over, Brooklyn, Moscow, Vladivostok, places where people disappear but don't quite die, where they're kept useful. Ramona's mother let out a sob. 12 years! He's been alive for 12 years and we thought... You thought what they wanted you to think, Stephen said, not unkindly. That's how they maintain control, fear and uncertainty. So why now? Ramona demanded. Why, after all this time, are they trying to kill you? What changed? Stephen's expression grew cold. 6 months ago, I acquired something Nikolai wants very badly. Information about his organization, names, accounts, operations, compiled over decades. A ledger, if you will. I've been using it to dismantle his operations piece by piece. Last week, I took his biggest smuggling route. The poisoning attempt was retaliation. And now they know about me, Ramona said. Now they know that Andrei Vulov's daughter saved my life. Stephen moved closer, his voice dropping. In their eyes, you've betrayed the family twice. First, by being born to a traitor. Second, by protecting me. That makes you a threat that needs to be eliminated. The apartment felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. But here's what they don't know, Stephen continued. What even I didn't know until I had my people dig deeper after last night. Your father's emails, they're not just birthday wishes. They're coded instructions. Breadcrumbs leading to something he hid before they took him. He pulled out his phone, showed her a screen filled with Cyrillic text. Analysis, patterns, hidden messages embedded in the seemingly random poetry her father had been sending. The Firebird, the Winter Palace, the key hidden where the heart remembers. He's been trying to tell you where he buried the original version of Nikolai's ledger. The one Nikolai doesn't know I only have copies of. The one that contains information even I haven't seen. Ramona stared at the screen, her father's words suddenly taking on new weight. He's been using me. All these years he's been preparing me for this moment, Stephen finished. For when you'd be old enough, smart enough, and, whether he intended it or not, connected enough to someone who could help you find it. You want to use her as bait, Ramona's mother said, standing up with sudden fury. You want to dangle my daughter in front of these monsters so you can get your ledger. No, Stephen said. I want to help her find her father. The ledger is leverage. It's the only thing valuable enough to trade for Andre's freedom. But I can't do it without Ramona. She's the only one who can decode his messages. She's the only one he's been preparing. Ramona looked at the photograph again. Her father, young and determined, holding up a broken boy who would become a dangerous man. A debt paid forward. A debt that had been waiting 12 years to be collected. Trust the language. The key is hidden where the heart remembers. Where do we start? She asked quietly. Her mother grabbed her arm. Ramona, no! Mama! Ramona turned to her, tears finally spilling over. He's alive. He's been alive this whole time, and he's been trying to reach me. He wouldn't want you to risk. He already did, Ramona said. The moment he sent me that first email. He's been training me, preparing me. All those Russian lessons, all those riddles and poems. It wasn't just about remembering him. It was about being ready for this. She looked back at Stephen. You want your ledger. I want my father. If we're going to do this, we do it as partners. Equal stakes. You don't use me. You work with me. Agreed? Stephen studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. Agreed. When their hands met, Ramona felt the weight of a debt 12 years in the making finally beginning to balance. Outside, the city gleamed in the afternoon light, beautiful and dangerous. Somewhere in that sprawl of steel and stone, her father was alive, waiting. And somewhere in the coded poetry he'd been sending, hidden in a language they'd shared since she was a child, was the key to bringing him home. The Firebird was about to begin its flight. The attack came at 2 a.m. Ramona had finally drifted into uneasy sleep on the safe house couch, her mother in the bedroom, when the first window exploded inward. Not shattered, exploded, like something had punched through it with mechanical force. She jerked awake to chaos. Smoke canisters hissing on the hardwood floor, thick gray clouds billowing toward the ceiling, the fire alarm screaming, and underneath it all, the sharp crack of gunfire. "Mama!" Ramona tried to scream, but smoke filled her lungs, turned her voice into a cough. The bedroom door flew open. Her mother stumbled out, disoriented, eyes streaming. Ramona lunged for her, grabbed her arm, tried to pull her toward the apartment door. But there were men there already, dark shapes moving through the smoke like ghosts, wearing masks, carrying weapons that looked too military, too professional to be real. One of them grabbed Ramona's mother. She fought, scratched, kicked, screamed, but he was too strong. A second man caught Ramona's arm, twisted it behind her back with brutal efficiency. Pain shot up her shoulder. "Mama!" This time she got the word out. "Ramona!"
Her mother's voice, raw with terror. "Ramona, don't!" Something hard cracked against the back of Ramona's skull. The world tilted, dimmed, went soft at the edges. She heard more gunfire, distant now, or maybe her ears weren't working right. Stephen's men fighting back. Too late. Always too late. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was her mother's face, streaked with tears and smoke, being dragged toward the shattered window. Then nothing. Consciousness returned in pieces, cold concrete against her cheek, the smell of rust and salt water, the distant sound of machinery, rhythmic, industrial. Her head throbbed where they'd hit her, each pulse sending spikes of pain through her skull. Ramona opened her eyes to darkness, broken only by a single bare bulb hanging from a wire somewhere above. She was in a warehouse, vast, empty, the kind of space where sounds echoed and disappeared into shadows. She tried to move and discovered her hands were zip-tied behind her back, plastic biting into her wrists. Her mother lay a few feet away, still unconscious, a bruise blooming purple across her cheekbone. "She's awake." The voice came from the darkness, Russian accent, cultured, almost pleasant. Footsteps approached, expensive shoes clicking against concrete. A man stepped into the light. He looked like her father. The same sharp cheekbones, the same intelligent eyes. But where her father had been gentle, this man radiated cold authority. He wore a perfectly tied suit, silk tie, gold watch that caught the light. Everything about him screamed power. "Ramona Peavy," he said, pronouncing her name carefully, like tasting something unfamiliar. "My niece. You have your mother's beauty, and, I suspect, your father's inconvenient conscience." "Nikolai," Ramona whispered. He smiled. "So you know me. Good. Your father spoke of you often, in the beginning, before he learned that speaking only earned him pain." "Where is he?" The words came out raw. "What have you done to him?" "Done to him?" Nikolai crouched beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, woody, wrong. "I've kept him alive, fed him, given him purpose. More mercy than he deserved for his betrayal." He gestured to something in the darkness behind him. Two of his men dragged forward a shape, a man, thin to the point of emaciation, wearing stained clothes, hands shackled. They forced him to his knees in the light. Ramona's heart stopped. Gray hair where there should have been black, deep lines carved into a face she'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times. Shoulders that had once lifted her onto his lap, now hunched and broken. But the eyes? Dark brown, warm even through 12 years of horror. Those were the same. "Papa," she breathed. Andrei Vulov, David Peavy, looked at his daughter, and tears spilled down his hollow cheeks. "Ramona, my little star, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "How touching," Nikolai said. He stood, brushing invisible dust from his suit. "You see, Ramona, you've created a problem for me. You saved Stephen Williams' life. Worse, you've made him interested in you, in your father, in the things I've worked very hard to keep buried." He pulled out a phone, held it up so she could see the screen. A photo of her at Bellissimo, shouting at Stephen's table. Another of her getting into Stephen's SUV. A third of the safe house building. Stephen thinks he's clever with his protection, his safe houses, his encrypted communications, but I've been in this business since before he learned to tie his shoes. I have people everywhere, including, as it turns out, on his security team. Betrayal. One of Stephen's own men had sold them out. "So, here's what's going to happen," Nikolai continued, his voice pleasant, like discussing a business transaction. "You're going to call Stephen Williams. You're going to tell him you're safe, that you've escaped, that you'll meet him at a location I provide. And when he arrives,
trusting, concerned for the girl who saved his life. My men will be waiting." "No," Ramona said. Nikolai's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. He nodded to one of his men, who pulled out a gun and pressed it against Andrei's temple. "No?" repeated. "Let me be clear about your situation. Your father has lived for 12 years because he's been useful, translating documents, teaching my men languages, making himself valuable. But usefulness has limits. You will cooperate, or I will put a bullet in his head and make you watch. Then I'll do the same to your mother. Then, eventually, to you. Do you understand?" Ramona looked at her father. He was shaking his head slightly, mouthing words, "Don't, please." But she thought about the photograph Stephen had shown her. Her father, young and determined, saving a broken boy because someone has to choose differently. She thought about the emails, the coded messages, 12 years of preparation for exactly this moment. Trust the language. And suddenly she understood. Not just the words, but the pattern. Her father hadn't been leaving her clues to find a ledger. He'd been teaching her how to survive this exact situation. How to speak in codes, how to hide messages in plain sight. "Okay," she said, meeting Nikolai's eyes. "I'll do it. Give me the phone."
Nikolai handed Ramona a burner phone, watching her with the patient intensity of a snake studying prey. One of his men cut the zip tie binding her wrists. Blood rushed back into her hands, pins and needles that made her fingers clumsy. "You have one chance," Nikolai said. "Make it convincing. Tell him you escaped during transport, that you're hiding, that you need extraction. Give him the address I text you. Any deviation, any code words, anything that sounds remotely like a warning." He gestured to the gun still pressed against her father's head. "You understand?" "I understand." Her father was staring at her with desperate intensity, still shaking his head in tiny movements. 12 years in captivity hadn't broken his spirit, just buried it under layers of survival. She could see him trying to communicate something with his eyes, some warning or instruction, but Nikolai's men jerked him back, forcing him to his knees. Ramona's mother had woken up during Nikolai's speech. She lay still on the cold concrete, watching through swollen eyes, smart enough not to draw attention. The phone felt heavy in Ramona's hand. She stared at the screen, mind racing through possibilities, through the lessons her father had embedded in 8 years of cryptic emails. The firebird knows the way home, but only when the winter breaks. Trust the language. In Russian folklore, the firebird was both blessing and curse, beautiful, dangerous, impossible to capture. But there was another story her father used to tell her, one he'd translated from an obscure regional variant. In that version, the firebird didn't fly to escape. It flew to lead hunters into traps, protecting its nest by sacrificing itself as bait. She thought about the coded message she'd sent Stephen from this very situation in the original story, P19, Pier 19. Her father had taught her that technique when she was 15, hidden in a game they'd played with Russian literature. "Every message has 2 meanings," he'd said, "one for the censor, one for the careful reader." Her fingers moved across the phone screen. "Stephen, I got away. In shock, but safe. Hiding at the old address. You know the one. The place where we first understood each other. Need extraction soon. They're looking for me. Please hurry. R." She held up the phone so Nikolai could read it. He studied the message, lips pursing slightly. "What does the place where we first understood each other mean?" "Bellissimo," Ramona said, keeping her voice steady. "The restaurant, where I warned him. It's the only place that makes sense, where I'd feel safe, where he'd know to look." Nikolai's eyes narrowed. "You're clever, like your father. That worries me." He took the phone, read the message again, then nodded slowly. "But it works. The restaurant is closed now, empty, perfect location for an ambush." He gestured to one of his men. "Send it." The message went through with a soft whoosh.
Now we wait, Nikolai said. He pulled over a metal chair, sat down facing Ramona like they were having a casual conversation. While we do, let me explain your future. Stephen Williams will come to save you. Heroes always do. My men will kill him and his bodyguards. Then you will become something more useful than bait. What do you mean? Stephen's organization doesn't die with him. He has lieutenants, operations, territories. Someone will step up to fill the vacuum, probably that overly loyal bodyguard of his, Marcus. And when they do, you will be there. The traumatized girl who watched Stephen die trying to save her. Grief-stricken, vulnerable, needing protection. His smile was predatory. They'll take you in, trust you, and you'll tell me everything. You want me to spy for you? I want you to be my eyes inside the organization that's been dismantling my business for 6 months. You'll find out where Stephen hid his copies of my ledger. You'll learn who his suppliers are, which politicians he owns, where he keeps his money. Nikolai leaned forward. You'll do this perfectly, convincingly, for as long as I need you to. Because if you don't... He stood, walked over to where Andre knelt, grabbed a fistful of her gray hair and yanked his head back. I'll start mailing you pieces of your father. Fingers first, then toes, then more important things. And after I've taken him apart piece by piece, I'll start on your mother. Do you understand what I'm offering you? Not death, something much slower. Ramona's mother whimpered. Andre's eyes were closed, tears streaming down his face, lips moving in what might have been prayer or might have been Russian curses. Don't do this, Zvezdochka, her father whispered, using his old nickname for her, Little Star. Don't let him turn you into what I ran from, please. I'm sorry, Papa, Ramona said, and she meant it. Sorry for what she was about to do, for the risk she was taking, for the years he'd suffered. But I'm not letting him kill you, not when you've survived this long. She turned to Nikolai, forced herself to meet his cold eyes. I'll do it. I'll spy for you. I'll get you everything you want. But you have to promise me on whatever honor the Vulov family has left, that you won't hurt them. Not while I'm cooperating. Honor, Nikolai repeated, amused. Your father used to talk about honor too, before I taught him that survival matters more. He released Andre's hair, let him slump forward. But yes, you have my word. Cooperate fully, convince me you're being truthful, and your parents live. Betray me, and they suffer. He pulled out his own phone, showed her a video feed. A small room, concrete walls, a single cot. This is where they'll be staying, comfortable enough as prisons go. You'll even get to video call them once a week, so you can see they're being treated well. Motivation to stay loyal. Ramona's stomach churned, but she nodded. When do I start? As soon as Stephen Williams is dead. Nikolai checked his watch, which, if he's as predictable as I think, should be in about 45 minutes. My men are already in position at Bellissimo. He gestured, and 2 of his guards hauled Ramona to her feet. You'll wait here with me. We'll watch together, via the cameras my people planted in the restaurant. You'll see exactly what happens when heroes try to save broken girls. Consider it a lesson in the cost of sentiment. They dragged her to a corner of the warehouse where monitors had been set up, showing multiple angles of Bellissimo's darkened dining room. Men with rifles positioned behind the bar, in the kitchen on the mezzanine level. A kill box, perfectly prepared. Ramona's father was watching her, and despite everything, the chains, the years of captivity, the gun-wielding men surrounding them, he smiled, small, sad, but real. Then he did something that made her heart skip. He touched his chest, right over his heart, then pointed at his temple. Then he mouthed 2 words in Russian, Umnaya devchka, smart girl. He knew. Somehow, despite everything, he understood what she'd done. Because Stephen Williams didn't know any old address. They'd met exactly once before tonight, and it had been at Bellissimo. There was no shared history, no coded location that would make sense to him. But the message she'd sent wasn't for Stephen. It was for Marcus. The bodyguard who'd driven her home that first night, who'd asked where she lived, who'd talked to her about her father like he actually cared. Marcus, who'd called the safe house apartment the old address when he'd told her they needed to move her. The message was designed to fail Stephen's security screening, to be obvious, suspicious, wrong enough that whoever monitored his communications would flag it immediately, would recognize it as a message sent under duress, probably containing false information, would know it was a trap. And Stephen Williams, the man who'd survived in this business for 20 years, who'd once been saved by her father from a similar ambush, would recognize Nikolai's pattern. Ramona had just bet everything, her life, her parents' lives, her father's 12 years of suffering, on the hope that the man she'd saved would be smart enough to save her back. On the monitor, a black SUV pulled up outside Bellissimo's darkened entrance. Nikolai smiled. Right on schedule. Your hero arrives. Ramona held her breath and prayed she'd been smart enough. That her father's lessons had been thorough enough. That trust, in the end, worked both ways.
Nikolai watched the monitors like a man savoring fine wine. On the screens, Stephen's SUV idled outside Bellissimo, engine running, headlights cutting through the darkness. One of Nikolai's men reported through an earpiece. Target vehicle stationary, no movement yet. He's being careful, Nikolai murmured. Good. Careful men make predictable mistakes when they think they're being smart. Ramona stood frozen, watching the SUV, silently begging it to drive away, to recognize the trap. But seconds ticked past, and the vehicle didn't move. Then Nikolai's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and held it up to show her. A text from an unknown number. Message flagged by security protocol. Sender location compromised. Extraction team standing by for alternate instructions. Interesting, Nikolai said softly. His pleasant expression hardened into something uglier. It seems Mr. Williams has better security than I gave him credit for. They've identified your message as suspicious. He turned to Ramona, and she saw her father tense in her peripheral vision. Which means either you're very unlucky or very clever. So let's try this again. Nikolai grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You're going to send another message. This one will be perfect, believable, with information only you would know. And this time, he pulled out a knife, walked over to her mother, and pressed the blade against her throat. Ramona's mother whimpered, her eyes wide with terror. Please, Ramona said, please, I'll do it. Just don't hurt her. Then convince me. Nikolai handed her the phone again. Where would Stephen believe you're hiding? Think carefully. Ramona's mind raced. She needed to send coordinates without being obvious. Needed to hide information in plain sight. Her father had spent 12 years teaching her this exact skill through those birthday emails. Messages that looked innocent but contained maps, instructions, warnings encoded in poetry and riddles. The Firebird knows the way home. In the old Russian tales her father used to tell, the Firebird always left a trail, not of feathers, but of fire. Small burns that glowed in darkness, visible only to those who knew where to look. She thought about the emails again, not just what they said, but how they said it. The structure, the pattern her father had used year after year. First letters, acrostics, the oldest code in the book, hidden in plain sight, because people read for meaning, not structure. Okay, she said, voice shaking just enough to sound genuine. I'll tell him the truth, where I actually am. He'll believe that. Nikolai's eyes narrowed. Go on. I'll tell him I'm safe, that I'm waiting, that I need him to come get me. But I'll reference the restaurant, where we met. It'll sound real, because it is real. It's the only shared memory we have. Write it. Let me see before you send. Ramona typed slowly,
carefully, in Russian first, composing in her father's language before translating to English. Her hands shook, but her mind was clear, calculating each word with surgical precision. Steven, я в порядке. At Riverside now. Подожди моего звонка. Wait for my call. She stared at the Russian text, then translated it into English, keeping the structure identical. Steven, I'm okay. At Riverside. Wait for my call. Riverside, Nikolai read over her shoulder. What's Riverside? Riverside Drive, Ramona lied smoothly. There's a coffee shop near Columbia where my father used to take me. Steven asked me about him during our first conversation. He'll remember. It's the kind of detail that makes it believable. It was a good lie, specific enough to sound true, emotional enough to explain why she'd choose it. Nikolai studied the message for a long moment. Your father used to teach at Columbia. The detail checks out. He nodded slowly. Send it. Ramona pressed send, and the message disappeared into the digital ether. What Nikolai hadn't seen, what he couldn't see because he was reading for meaning, not structure, was the code hidden in the first letters of each sentence. Steven, я в порядке. На Riverside сейчас. Подожди моего звонка. CNP, in Cyrillic. But those letters in Russian corresponded to different sounds, different meanings, and when you translated them back through the lens of Russian phonetics overlaid on English geography, P, the Russian P, pronounced like English. 19, the only two-digit number that appeared in her previous message timestamp. P19, Pier 19, exactly where she was. Her father had taught her this technique when she was 16, hidden inside a game about Russian poets. The best codes, he'd said, are the ones that look like they're not codes at all. Just natural language, structured naturally. But to someone who knows the language deeply, who understands not just words but patterns, messages within messages. She watched her father across the warehouse. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, mixed with terror, mixed with something else. Hope, maybe. He touched his chest again, over his heart, then tapped his temple twice. Smart. Smart. On the monitors, the SUV outside Bellissimo suddenly reversed, tires squealing, and disappeared into the night. Damn, one of Nikolai's men reported. Target vehicle has left the area. They didn't take the bait. Nikolai's jaw tightened. Of course they didn't. Williams didn't get where he is by being stupid. He turned to Ramona. Your second message, has he responded? Not yet, Ramona said, keeping her voice small, defeated. Then we wait. Nikolai checked his watch. He'll have people analyzing your messages, trying to determine if you're compromised. Standard protocol. The question is whether your little performance was convincing enough. 20 minutes crawled past. Ramona sat on the cold concrete. Her mother pulled close beside her, both of them trying not to shake. Her father remained kneeling, guards flanking him, watching everything with exhausted eyes that had seen too much. Then Nikolai's phone buzzed. He read the screen, and his expression shifted, confusion flickering across his features before he masked it. Movement reported at Pier 19, he said slowly. Multiple vehicles, armed personnel. He looked at Ramona with something new in his eyes. Not anger yet, assessment. Why would Stephen Williams send men to Pier 19? There's nothing there but abandoned warehouses and... He stopped. Looked around at the warehouse they were standing in. Looked at Ramona. What did you do? He whispered. Outside, the sound of engines. Multiple vehicles. Coming closer. What did you do? Ramona met his eyes and smiled. Small, sad, but real. I trusted the language, she said, in perfect Russian. Just like my father taught me. Nikolai lunged for her, knife appearing in his hand, rage twisting his features into something monstrous. Then the warehouse doors exploded inward, with a sound like the end of the world, and everything dissolved into smoke and thunder, and the sharp crack of gunfire that meant rescue, or war had begun.
The world became fire and noise. Stephen's men came through every entrance at once, doors, windows, even through the rusted metal panels of the warehouse roof. Smoke grenades hissed and tumbled across the concrete floor, releasing dense white clouds that swallowed the overhead lights. Red laser sights cut through the haze like angry fireflies. "Contact left!" someone shouted in Russian. Gunfire erupted, sharp, percussive cracks that echoed off metal walls and made Ramona's ears ring. Nikolai's men returned fire, muzzle flashes strobing in the smoke like lightning. Ramona hit the ground, pulling her mother down with her. "Stay low," she screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Through the smoke she saw shadows moving, tactical, coordinated, professional. Stephen's people. She recognized Marcus's silhouette, the particular way he moved, efficient and lethal. He took down one of Nikolai's guards with 2 precise shots, already pivoting toward the next target before the first man hit the ground. "Fall back," Nikolai's voice, sharp with fury. "Get the prisoners, they're our leverage." Hands grabbed Ramona, rough, desperate. One of Nikolai's men hauled her upright, arm locked around her throat. She clawed at him, gasping, but he was too strong. Her mother screamed somewhere close by. Her father was shouting in Russian, words she couldn't make out through the ringing in her ears. Then Nikolai was there, materializing from the smoke like a demon. His expensive suit was torn, blood streaking his face from a cut above his eye. The knife was still in his hand, and now he pressed it against Ramona's ribs, just below her heart. "Cease fire!" he roared. "Cease fire or she dies!" The warehouse went quiet, except for the hiss of smoke and the ringing aftermath of gunshots. Shadows froze in place. Red laser dots converged on Nikolai but didn't fire, couldn't fire, not without hitting Ramona. Stephen Williams stepped forward from the smoke, gun raised but not aimed. Marcus flanked him, along with 4 other men in tactical gear. They moved like a unit, predatory and patient. "Let her go, Nikolai," Stephen said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but Ramona heard the steel underneath. "This is over." "Over?" Nikolai laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "You've just started a war you can't win, Williams. I have 50 men on their way here. The NYPD on my payroll will have this entire pier locked down in 10 minutes. You'll be trapped." "Your 50 men are currently being arrested by the actual NYPD," Stephen replied. "Turns out the FBI has been very interested in your organization for quite some time. I simply gave them a reason to move tonight." Nikolai's grip tightened, the knife pressed harder, and Ramona felt a sharp sting as it broke skin. "Then we all die here. Is that what you want?" "Nobody else dies tonight," Stephen said. "You've already lost. The ledger's been delivered to federal prosecutors. Your accounts are frozen. Your political connections are severing ties as we speak. This," he gestured at the warehouse, at Ramona, at the standoff, "is just you refusing to accept reality." "Reality is I'm holding a knife to your savior's heart," Nikolai snarled. "Reality is I can end her before you fire a single shot." Ramona's father had been silent during this exchange, still on his knees, still flanked by guards. But now he spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Ramona!" he shouted in Russian. "Zhar ptitsa! Kluch! Сейчас!" "Firebird! Key! Now!" For a split second, Ramona didn't understand. Then it clicked. The pendant, the silver key pendant he'd given her when she was 13, the one she'd worn every day for 8 years until his disappearance, the one her mother had kept in a jewelry box after, unable to throw it away, the one that was still around her neck, hidden under her shirt. Her father's last email. The key is hidden where the heart remembers. Not a metaphor, not a riddle, literal instructions. What is he saying? Nikolai demanded, not understanding the rapid Russian. Ramona's hand moved before she could think, fingers closing around the pendant through her shirt. She felt the tiny button on its back, the one she'd always thought was just decorative detail. She pressed it. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a sound, small, metallic, like a mechanical click, echoed from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. From a support column 20 feet away that looked like all the others, except it wasn't. The column exploded. Not with fire, with smoke. Dense, chemical smoke that made the earlier grenades look like candles. It erupted from hidden compartments her father must have installed years ago, back when he'd been planning his escape, preparing contingencies for disasters he'd hoped would never come. The smoke hit like a tidal wave, thick, choking, impossible to see through. Nikolai's grip loosened in surprise, and Ramona threw herself sideways, hitting the concrete hard, rolling away from where she'd been standing. Gunfire erupted again, wild, panicked shots from Nikolai's remaining men who couldn't see their targets. Return fire from Steven's team, precise even through the haze, trained professionals who knew how to fight blind. Someone grabbed Ramona's arm in the darkness. She almost screamed before she recognized the grip. Marcus. "Stay down," he said, pulling her behind a concrete pillar. "Where's your mother?" "I don't know. She was—" "I've got her," another voice, one of Steven's men, "moving to the exit." Through the chemical fog, Ramona heard her father screaming, not in pain, but in rage. The sound of chains rattling, a grunt, a body hitting the floor. Then her father's voice, clear and strong despite 12 years of captivity. "Ramona, run! Get out!" "I'm not leaving you," she shouted back. "You don't have a choice." Steven appeared beside Marcus, grabbing Ramona's other arm. "Marcus, get her out, now." "Sir, you need—" "That's an order." More gunfire, closer now. A bullet sparked off the pillar inches from Ramona's head, and she felt Marcus physically lift her, carrying her toward where emergency lights marked an exit. "No!" she fought against him. "My father! We can't leave him!" "Your father just saved your life," Marcus said grimly, still moving. They burst through a side door into the cold night air. The pier stretched out before them, dark water lapping at rotted wood pilings. More SUVs waited, engines running. Ramona's mother was already being loaded into one, crying, reaching back toward the warehouse. Behind them, the building lit up with muzzle flashes visible through broken windows. More smoke pouring out, the sound of combat, brutal, close quarters, desperate. Then a single shot, different from the others, heavier, final, and silence. Ramona stopped breathing. The warehouse door opened. Steven emerged first, supporting someone, a thin figure in stained clothes, limping but alive. Her father. "Papa!" Ramona broke free from Marcus, sprinting back across the pier. She crashed into her father's arms, and he caught her despite his weakness, despite the chains still hanging from his wrists, despite everything. "Zvezdochka," he whispered into her hair, "you were so brave, so smart." "Nikolai?" Ramona asked, pulling back to look at Steven. Steven's expression was carefully neutral. He chose to fight rather than surrender. He won't be making that choice again. Dead. Nikolai was dead. The man who'd terrorized her father for 12 years, who'd threatened to cut up her family piece by piece, gone. Ramona knew she should feel something about that. Relief, maybe, or horror. But all she felt was numb. "Federal agents are 2 minutes out," Marcus reported, hand to his earpiece. "We need to move." "Wait." Ramona's father gripped Steven's arm with shaking hands. "The ledger, the real one, it's—" "Not here," Steven finished. "I know. That's a conversation for later, Andre. Right now, we get you and your family somewhere safe." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue lights strobed against low clouds.
They loaded into the SUVs, Ramona, her mother, her father, all together in one vehicle, Stephen in another, Marcus driving them, heading away from the pier as police cars converged behind them. Ramona held her father's hand, bone-thin, scarred, but warm and alive, and watched the warehouse recede into the distance. Smoke still poured from its broken windows, carrying away 12 years of captivity, of secrets, of a debt that had finally been paid. "The pendant," her father said softly. "You kept it." "Always," Ramona whispered. "I planted those smoke charges the week before they took me, just in case. I never thought." He trailed off, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. "I never thought you'd be the one to use them." "You prepared me for everything," Ramona said. "Every email, every code, every lesson. You were always trying to save me." Her father smiled, tired, broken, but real. "No, Zvezdochka, you saved yourself. You saved all of us. I just gave you the language. You learned how to speak it."
The safe house this time was different. Not a sterile corporate apartment, but a brownstone in Brooklyn that felt like someone actually lived there. Books on the shelves, worn rugs on hardwood floors, a kitchen that smelled like coffee and something baking. Ramona stood on the rooftop 3 days after Pier 19, watching the East River reflect the sunrise. Her father was recovering in a private clinic under Stephen's protection. Real doctors, real treatment, real hope. Her mother was sleeping in a guest room downstairs, finally resting after 72 hours of barely closing her eyes. And Ramona was trying to figure out who she was now that the crisis had passed. Footsteps on the stairs behind her. She didn't turn around, knew the sound of them by now. "Couldn't sleep?" Stephen asked, joining her at the railing. "Too quiet," Ramona said. "I keep waiting for the next crisis, the next threat, like my body forgot how to relax. That feeling takes time to fade. Sometimes it never does." He handed her a cup of coffee, black, the way she'd mentioned liking it once. He remembered details like that, filed them away. The feds finished processing Nikolai's organization, 43 arrests, his entire operation dismantled. It'll take years for the trials, but it's over. Is it? Ramona turned to look at him. Organizations like that don't just disappear. Someone will try to rebuild. Let them try. Stephen's voice was cold. They'll find I'm very good at preventing reconstruction. They stood in silence, watching the city wake up. A garbage truck rumbled past below. A jogger ran by with a dog. Normal life, continuing like the last week hadn't happened. "I visited your father yesterday," Stephen said. "He's gaining weight, color coming back. The doctors say another month and he'll be strong enough to leave the clinic." "And then what?" Ramona asked. "We can't go back to our old lives. Nikolai's people might be arrested, but the Bratva has a long memory. I've made arrangements. New identities if you want them, protection for as long as you need it. Your father saved my life once. Now you've saved it again. That's a debt I don't take lightly." Ramona thought about that, about debts and obligations, about the weight of gratitude that could become its own kind of prison. "My father told me something," she said, "in the hospital. He said the reason he saved you that night wasn't because he thought you'd owe him. It was because he wanted to prove to himself that he could still choose differently, that violence didn't have to be the only language he spoke." Stephen was quiet for a long moment. "He told me the same thing. I didn't understand it then. I was just a kid who thought power came from fear and force." He paused. "I'm not sure I fully understand it now." "But you came for us," Ramona said, "at Pier 19. You could have walked away. Let Nikolai have us. Eliminate a complication." "I could have." Stephen's ice blue eyes met hers. "Your father always said you'd be the one to end this. The cycle, the violence, the debt. I didn't know what he meant until I saw you decode his messages. Outsmart Nikolai. Save your family using nothing but language and courage." "I didn't end it," Ramona said softly, looking back at the river. "I just survived it." "Sometimes," Stephen said, "that's the same thing."
The sun crept higher, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the city, her father was healing. Her mother was sleeping without nightmares for the first time in years. And Ramona was standing on a rooftop, free, alive, forever changed. She thought about that night at Bellissimo, about the 2 Russian men, the poisoned ricotta, the split-second decision that had rewritten her entire life, about all the invisible poisonings that happened in the world, the slow corruptions, the compromises, the ways people destroyed each other with smiles and handshakes, but also about the antidotes, the small acts of courage, the moments when someone chose differently. Her father pulling a bleeding boy from an alley, Ramona shouting a warning across a restaurant, Stephen coming to save a waitress he barely knew. Every poison had an antidote. You just had to be brave enough to take it. "What will you do now?" Stephen asked. Ramona smiled, feeling the weight of the silver key pendant against her chest. "Learn more languages. Finish my degree. Maybe work for someone who could use a translator who understands how to read between the lines." Stephen raised an eyebrow. "Is that an application?" "It's a possibility." She turned to face him fully. "But on my terms. I'm not your employee, not your asset, not your debt. If I work with you, it's as an equal. Someone who chooses to help, not someone who has to. Like your father taught you?" "Exactly like my father taught me." Stephen extended his hand. "Then I accept your terms, Miss Peavy. Though I should warn you, working with me comes with its own complications." "I survived Nikolai Vulov," Ramona said, shaking his hand. "I think I can handle complications." Behind them, the city stretched out in all directions. Millions of lives, millions of stories, millions of small poisonings and small antidotes playing out in apartments and offices and restaurants. Ramona had been a waitress who understood Russian. Now she was something else, something her father had been preparing her to become all along. Someone who survived, someone who chose differently. Someone who understood that the most powerful weapon wasn't a gun or a knife, but the right words, spoken at the right moment in the right language. The door to the rooftop opened. Marcus appeared, phone in hand. "Sorry to interrupt. The hospital called. Mr. Peavy is asking for you both." Ramona felt her heart lift. "Is he okay?" "He's fine. Says he remembered where he hid something important." Marcus smiled slightly. "Something about a firebird and a winter palace." The ledger, the real one, the piece her father had been protecting all along. Stephen and Ramona exchanged a look. "Shall we?" Stephen asked. "The poison was already in the food," Ramona whispered, more to herself than to him. A memory of that first night, that first impossible choice. But so was the antidote. "What?" She smiled. "Something my father taught me, about how the things that can destroy you are often right next to the things that can save you. You just have to know which one to choose." They headed downstairs together, toward whatever came next, toward healing and complications, and the strange alliance forged between a crime lord and a waitress who'd learned that sometimes saving one life could change everything. Behind them, the sun rose fully over Manhattan, burning away the shadows, promising a new day. The Firebird had made it home, and the story, their story, was just beginning.